I work with a lot of elite performers in combat sports and some in other multi-event sports like triathlons or even ultramarathon runners, things like that. Let me fill you in on what Jackupuncture is now, right? We are a performance-focused acupuncture clinic. We have 3 rooms. We work with multiple patients from, like I said, elite performers within combat sports organizations. Bellator doesn't exist anymore. One, UFC, and other like Muay Thai and boxing organizations. We work with fighters from amateur to pro within those combat sports. In our space, we have a space in the back that has tons of different tools for us to be using to objectively assess their performance, whether it be their brain or their body, as well as things to help them rehab or improve their performance within that space. We're obviously using a lot of different tech, including NeckCare, to assess things objectively. And then we'll send them home with a home exercise program or some tips on sleep hygiene or what they should be doing to help their neck as far as strengthening, stretching, self-massage, or things like that. Currently, I am the main provider. My wife comes in, she'll be in full-time soon. And from there, we'll actually be training other providers on the specific approach that we have to brain health. My work with NeckCare came into place because of the work I do with concussion and brain health in general. They need to make sure their brain and their bodies are resilient as possible. I've developed a particular approach to helping the brain rehab and remain resilient throughout all of that trauma so that they get the best out of themselves as possible. And we have a whole program that we've designed to then teach other providers how to do this type of care for these types of athletes to meet their needs and goals. So I've been in practice for 8 years, private practice for 8 years, focusing on concussion more in the last 4 or so. I was a combat sports athlete myself. I fought in Japan. I was in kickboxing here in Hawaii. I trained Muay Thai for multiple years. Still train on my own, but nothing competitively anymore. So I've always been working with athletes. That was my introduction to acupuncture itself in Japan, was my needs to keep my body up and going when I was running marathons, fighting in kickboxing, and coaching and playing in a touch rugby team the entire time. So now I work with those types of athletes here. As you know, when it comes to taking care of anyone, we will have these subjective and objective measures, what they are feeling, what they tell us, what they're able to communicate. And there are certain things that they aren't even able to themselves identify or understand what's going on. And that's where we have all these different tools to help us objectively measure and identify what else is going on. What is the body? What is the brain showing us and telling us? The patients can only tell us so much. So we have balance and sensory integration tools. We have dynamic vision tools, tools to measure autonomic performance and pupillometry, for example. And of course, NeckCare, right? And as far as the metrics for our neck health. So we put all of these things together to get a very good sense of the subjective and the objective measures of what's going on for this person, where we can help, how we can help, progress through reassessments using these tools so that we can understand where the treatment has brought them and where we still need to help them go. It is definitely a more challenging and rewarding niche to work with, right? When we have people who were able to help get through these things, it's important. What I see in all of my objective measures is when someone is being consistent with their care, we generally do get better levels of performance even after competition. So when it comes to sensory integration, whether it be in our balance assessments or with NeckCare and how we're able to do that for the neck, and technically our ocular and vestibular systems, right? When we're doing the butterfly test, for example, we get to unfortunately show them what's happening when things aren't being addressed well. So it is a very helpful thing for us to show the patients what they're not noticing, so they understand the real need of taking care of themselves, because we will be able to point out certain aspects of their function, which they can objectively see, and they watch the thing play and like, oh, that's how my thing was performing. I knew it felt off, but that's just kind of how things are. We get to then say, okay, this is an issue. You can see now what's actually happening. We can reflect to you in this type of scenario what's going right, what's going wrong. And if we choose to continue down this path, we need to make sure we're doing the best to keep this healthy. Because the more this declines, the more other things you're not noticing are also likely to decline. And that will play out not just in the ring or in the octagon. That's going to play out in your life, at work, with your family, your friends, and all of these things. So whether it be the sensor integration or other aspects, all of those objective tools really, really are important for us and really valuable for our patients to help them understand the value of what we're doing and how vital it is for their lives overall. The visuals are helpful to some extent because you'll also have the patients who they're choosing not to go because they don't want to know, which I can understand to some degree, right? What I find is that the objectives don't help with the buy-in as much as their own subjective experience. So if I can connect the objectives to what they've been experiencing and help them see, you've described and told me that these things are happening. There are particular systems or deficits that you might be experiencing that lead to those problems. It will help us see if that's related and if that's the case. And if so, then we know, hey, we have an avenue to help with those things you're experiencing. So the buy-in really comes from them having such a severe problem, unfortunately, usually, or they've just come off a concussion and it's not healing as fast. They want to get back to training. I'm actually helping one athlete manage her return to MMA, and she got concussed halfway through our planned timeline of care. And so we're almost starting at the beginning. She's asking, when can I return to sport? Can I get into this next competition? There's this BJJ, I think, coming next month. And I tell her, hey, we're going to go off of what you're feeling and what the objectives tell us. And you're going to make that final call. So, of course, in her case, we're getting that buy-in because she knows there's a problem. She just experienced it again. But in other cases, it's them coming to us and really saying, I have this problem. Can we understand this together? What do I do? Help us understand. This is why I need to be doing this testing more. Well, for me, whether I'm in person or watching it, there is a little bit always of anxiety because, yes, I do understand the consequences of the sport. I lived them firsthand. I'm usually able to put that to the side for the most part as the fight's going on. And I'm not thinking about it as a clinician because if I do, it really does just worry me. If I'm, candid. But I understand the desire to compete in this sport. Combat sports is a really unique place for us to understand how we stack up against someone else in our field. And I'm not sure you get such a visceral and real measure of what your training, what your preparations have led you to as far as your own ability goes than in combat sports when you have to then kind of put your life at risk, or at least your brain at risk, to do the measuring. I know what that's like, and I got to put that aside when I'm watching because otherwise it's just anxiety inducing and doing to get back into the clinic. Like, of course, afterwards I'll reflect on that, and I know what needs to get done. There's always a process we'll have to go through. The objectives will tell us, the symptoms will tell us, they will guide the care. So I try to enjoy it. There's a lot of excitement there. I know the thrill of the win. I know the lows of a loss. A lot goes into this sport. So, and a lot gets taken out of us in it. So I try to enjoy that because we won't always be able to. Athletes in general will have a better level of performance than the general population. And then when you go into combat sports, what I can say based on some of the other tools I've used that give us normative data for different sports, but not combat sports, is that top level combat sports athletes will perform in certain realms quite well versus the general population, but still not at the same level as other professional sports. And I think that speaks to what you were saying is they are taking a lot of damage. So there's certain types of injuries or deficits that they probably more consistently experience, but have a really great adaptive ability to train and compete through. I often honestly think of combat sports as a measure of who has maintained their resilience the best. We've all been fighting. We've all been going through the same types of training and sparring. We all receive that damage. So when we compete, it's more like who's coming in here with the least injuries, the fewest injuries, the least amount of damage, or at least the less recovered. What you asked when it comes to the joint perception versus sensory integration, I'll see people who do really great when it comes to their NeckCare assessments of that, but then do really poorly when it comes to their balance assessments of that. Again, we're talking about these different strategies. I can't say that in my experience, I've maybe collected enough or dove into my own data enough to see that kind of trend. With combat sports, we don't have a season, right? They're always incurring damage. We're always in season. The best I do is when they do come in, I have a 2-day series of evaluations where we go through functional assessments first to check all the different systems that are affected during concussion or like head trauma. So we can see how is the body functioning, what's it telling us about brain function. And then the next day, we're going to dive into more of our tech. So I've got my EEG, I got NeckCare, and then we'll do a few other things on that day to see more objectively what's going on. We put all of that together with questionnaires and intake forms from the patient, and we look at all of that and say, okay, this right now is where you are. Whereas a baseline generally for other athletes, we're talking about, okay, before your season, we're going to see where things stand. Plop, that's where it is. In this case, these athletes are coming to me in the middle of their competition or training. They would just want to get better, but to understand how to get them better, I still have to see what this current baseline looks like. We go through a 2-day series of evaluations. So we're doing the functional assessments and neurophysiological assessments. Once we have that baseline, I do have a particular treatment that innovated called Peak Mind. So we do a very particular type of electroacupuncture that is complemented by other modalities, and we put them through a series of care first. So we're getting that brain back online. We're getting it to more comprehensively get a chance to heal itself, to correct some of the errors that it is able to identify on its own. That goes through its learning process, this whole window of neuroplasticity that we open up. Then after that, we do a reassessment. So we do those 2 days at the beginning. We also do that 2-day at the end. We're comparing and saying, okay, this is where we've gotten. If we're looking to rehab and improve you, there are certain things here that these objectives are showing us still need to get done. So we'll then develop a plan inside the clinic. These are the things we'll be doing here together to help you with that. That might include dry needling, electroacupuncture, soft tissue work, manual therapy, some rehab exercises here. And here's your plan at home to make sure we're on the right track, we're being consistent with our care, and we get the most out of this as possible. So that's kind of what the Peak Mind program looks like that I do when it comes to anyone who is an elite performer, who is in sports of some kind, who was in sports, or is currently competing at a high level. You will get some that have more buy-in. You'll also get some who are bored by the simplicity of what sometimes rehab can look like. They're wanting to get right back at it, and it's trying to help them understand, hey, your body is telling us that it can't do those things right now, and that if it does, you're telling me you get symptoms. And so we've got to manage that. And so we help them understand how to do the home exercise programs, maybe sometimes how to make it more enjoyable. The next step, actually, with the girl I mentioned, I'm going to go into the gym with her. I'm going to look at what equipment she has available to her, and we're going to develop that program together and say, okay, this is how you can do your bag work that is going to somewhat mirror or mimic the type of rehab I want you to be doing, but in a fashion that helps you maintain your skill set. I'm actually in the middle of developing what will be kind of the basis of a combat sport return to combat protocol looks like in my clinic to fix the brain. Well, since we are talking about the UFC PIs, integration of NeckCare into their approach to things, what I can say is I've been trying to create a performance institute of my own here, right? That's what my clinic kind of is. I'm growing into something like that. And as that does move forward, the goal would be to work with combat sports athletes more and make that more accessible to them. One thing in general for combat sports athletes, like you said, their fathers, their brothers, their sons, they're also employees. Generally, they're usually juggling multiple jobs, and it's hard for them to get the kind of care that they need for this type of sport. So I am developing a peak combat program, which is my Peak Mind program, but specific to combat sports athletes, so that we can find a way of making this crucial care for them more accessible and affordable, and still extremely valuable and effective. So I'm really working towards getting something like that done for them, based on my experience with Max Holloway and my other professional fighters, right? Like I know how to do this now. I've been doing this. I just now need to uh, bring that price down, because not everyone is a UFC champion and makes that kind of money, but they still need that same level of care. And so that's what Peak Combat, this Peak Mind based program, is going to be.